Joining us is Billy Coxhead, who is a CFO at a private school and has been doing it for 26 years. Where does the money come from?
Yeah. And again, being a private school, roughly 92% of our revenue, if you want to call it that, is tuition. So families paying tuition represents 92% of our revenue. And then the other 8% comes from contributions. And that can either be what we call the annual fund. Basically, we are asking them, parents, once they pay tuition, they still get asked to contribute, which they can get a charitable deduction for, contribute to the annual fund. And then we also ask families to contribute to our endowment, and we build up an endowment. And so we'll get some earnings off our endowment. So the other 8% is contributions and endowment, but endowment doesn't get created on its own. It's got to be started with contributions, just a little slightly different in whether you spend it immediately or try to allow that to grow. So 92% tuition, 8% contributions.
Okay, great. How much of the budget gets allocated, would you say, towards payroll?
Yeah, that's a common question, and the round number is 75% of our budget is payroll and benefits. We also wrap in benefits as part of the compensation package, and the major benefits are retirement contributions, health insurance are the two main ones. We got some other ancillary ones, but those are the two main things. But and health insurance is obviously really expensive and concern for everybody. And anyway, that's a big part of the benefit package. But anyway, 75% goes to payroll and benefits.
Okay, great. So how much money or how much of the budget is spent per student? I do a lot of Googling and I hear that's how a lot of districts, mostly public schools, but I don't know if private
Yeah,
schools might be different, how
yeah,
they factor it. Do they do it per student or how do they set the budget?
yeah. And it's not like that for the public school. We don't have any kind of calculations on how much we're spending per student. When we build the budget, it's more of a what are the needs for next year?
Mhm.
How much do we need to pay our teachers? Give them a raise of some kind, hopefully trying to outpace inflation. Um, and then what are the other budgetary items that we need to run the school? Landscaping, athletics, fine arts, um, text and teaching materials, whatever. And we roll it up that way and say, okay, these are all our expenses. What is the tuition to cover this whole thing? And so once we get that number, we also build it in of we have to obviously project the number of students. And so the big budgetary item is, the number of students, and then how much do we have to charge those students to cover the expenses. So, I mean, in one sense, you could sort of, I guess, say that the tuition per student is a rough estimate of the cost per student, but we don't view it that way uh, because our budgetary students, we have 4 tuition levels, and that's what complicates the things a little bit. So kindergarten is one tuition band, first grade through fourth grade is another tuition band, fifth and sixth grade is a tuition band, and seventh through 12th grade is another tuition band. So we sort of build it by number of students that we expect we're going to get. Here are all our expenses. How much do we need to charge in order to cover all those expenses?
Okay, great. So, I know we work at a private school, but who has the final say on budget plans? Is there any one person, or is it a collective? Like, is there a chain that has to be followed? Is there a
Yeah,
policy where you can only spend an X amount without approval? How does that
yeah,
work?
yeah. That's a good question. Since we are a private school, basically the bulk of the work of collecting the data and presenting the information falls on me. But we obviously have a head of school that is obviously an integral part of this. But we also have a board of trustees They are all volunteers. Many of them are parents of the school, but not all of them. And they make the final say. But a subset of that board of trustees is a finance committee. And so that's where the bulk of the actual work goes on. We'll have a marathon finance committee meeting at budget time, going over all the assumptions that I have put in, which I've gotten information from admissions, the head of school, whatever. And we'll show it to the finance committee, and we'll actually run iterations of different scenarios of number of students, tuition increase, compensation increase. And there's certainly a little bit of an art in addition to a science to put into it. But anyway, the finance committee makes a recommendation to the full board, and the full board is the one that approves it.
Nice. Okay, so my next question is, uh, what is something that schools, other than staff and teachers and stuff, we know that's a huge part of the budget, obviously. But what is something schools spend a lot of money on that may surprise many people? What is something that you know?
That's a great question. And the initial answers are security. And that has become more and more important and a greater and greater dollar value over the last 5-10 years, especially with this last school shooting in Nashville, Tennessee. That was a very close school to ours. And so that made a lot of people anxious about, well, what are we doing? Could we prevent something like that? And you can't prevent everything, but it is putting a heightened awareness on security. And so we spend a lot of money on security in terms of cameras, even though that doesn't stop any coming in. But we have two police officers that we pay to be on our campus from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day a school is in session. But in terms of entrance to the doors, we got to have access to the doors. Nobody can get in. All the doors are locked. You got to have some kind of access, somebody key. And anyway, the point of it is security is a big expense that used to not be as expensive. And then the second one is technology and trying to provide students with current technology to prepare them for college and beyond. And so that just feels like a black hole at sometimes, the amount of money that we spend for in classroom instruction that involves technology.
Okay, great. Um, okay, so most people, a lot of people outside looking in, they would agree that teachers should be getting paid more. But is that realistic? Because I mean, we know if we all, if you had a button that says, "Hey, I'll press it and everyone can start making more money," I'm sure you would hit that button, but I know it's not that easy. And what is something like what what can be done to make that happen? What is realistic?
Boy, that's the $100,000 question right there.
Mm-hmm.
Is it really okay, long term, if a school like Wesleyan were trying to solve that problem, we would find a benefactor who would donate you know $50 million to the school's endowment to fund teacher salaries. And so that would allow us to use earnings off the endowment in perpetuity to pay teachers more. Now, that is, the odds of that happening are low. But the other side of it is, we have to keep raising tuition to pay teachers more. And there are limits on how much you can charge in tuition before you run everybody off.
Mm-hmm.
Even the top 1%, eventually they're just not going to pay any more in tuition. So there's nothing that we've got that would solve that instantaneously. So we do, again, with the biggest part of our budget already going to comp and benefits, to pay people more, we got to raise tuition more, and there are only certain limits. We got limits on that. So again, apart from somebody just dumping an endowment number on us that we could then use, I don't see, I don't know how to do it.
Yeah. And then, um, that kind of goes into like kind of the last question is, well, what is something that you think, well, and this is for the average taxpayer. I know the private school, but what is the average, say, the tuition payer? What is something that they should know? They should think about school budgets. What is something that just the general public should just be more aware of, from your opinion?
Yeah. Uh, that tuition does not cover 100% of the school's budget or cover 100% of the school's expenses. And so even though it's 92% roughly, and that seems like a lot, it still doesn't cover everything. And so we're still looking for ways to balance the budget outside of tuition. Therefore, its gifts and contributions allow us to do that. But barring that, we would have to cut, expenses and based on the school population and what we're trying to do to attract students, that's a tough one too. So what would people know? Tuition doesn't cover everything.